Yeah, it's time for The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour The World This Week, where we're pleased to welcome from the International Herald Tribune, Marcus Mabry. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here.
Also with us, Thierry Arnaud of France's leading 24-hour news television station, BFM TV. Naïda Nakad, who's the head of our Arab language services here at France 24, and Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP. The World This Week, where you can always join in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, where our handle here is @FrançoisF24. Now, despite a huge spike in bloodshed inside Syria, protesters this Friday coming out in huge numbers after prayers to mark 9 months of uprising against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The protesters chanting, "The Arab League is killing us, enough deadlines." This as Damascus negotiates over whether or not to let foreign observers into the country. Now, you see these images regularly, Naïda. We know the spike in killing has been huge, 20% according to the UN, just in the past 2 weeks. And yet, those the huge crowds that we're getting in places like Homs.
It's absolutely amazing. I think the Syrian people have proved to be among the most courageous in the world, because we do know what the Syrian regime is like. Nobody really expected them to be able to stand for that long. Because now we're talking about the casualties, but we're not talking about the prisoners. Many people think that we're around between 14 and maybe 20,000 prisoners. And when you go into a Syrian prison, it's quite harsh. We can talk about torture there. So I think they are very, very courageous. And I think what was even more outstanding in the way they have been behaving is that for about few months they could have doubted, because the international community was really not responding as it had responded in Libya or elsewhere. But no, they continued. And I think now we're getting towards a turn with what happened with the Russians and all the other things that I think we'll be talking about.
Let's pick up on that. It certainly acted like a wake-up call. The UN's Human Rights Commissioner telling a closed-door session of the Security Council in New York that the death toll inside Syria had now topped 5,000, 1,000 of those, again, inside of the last 2 weeks. Now, that prompted nations like France to employ some undiplomatic language in the direction of the likes of Russia and China.
It is scandalous that the Security Council cannot put pressure on the Syrian authorities. The Security Council is morally responsible for what is happening today in Syria and for the suffering of the Syrian people.
Now, later in the week, Russia seemed to bend with a proposal to back the Arab League, a proposal the West still finds light on substance. But if you listen to Moscow's 180-degree change in tone between Tuesday and Thursday, it's quite startling.
If those who refuse to put pressure on the armed extremist wing of the opposition accuse us at the same time of blocking the work of the Security Council, I would call such an approach simply immoral.
I must say that the reaction of colleagues in the Security Council was very constructive. They welcomed the Russian initiative. They made a number of comments as to the text of the resolution, various aspects of the text of the resolution, and we said that we were looking forward to working with them.
Marcus Mabry, will the real Russia please stand up?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's actually one of those moments where you look at the diplomacy around an issue versus the reality. And the diplomacy is, you know, everyone at the UN will tell you, both Russia's allies and its opponents will tell you that this was a huge moment. The fact that Russia put forward a resolution, a draft resolution in which Syria would be condemned, Syria, all sides would be asked for restraint, but Russia would come out against its Syrian friends. Is huge in of itself. But again, as you said, there is no substance there. There are no sanctions. What the West wants is Russia and China to back sanctions against Syria, to actually force the Assad regime to make a difference, to change. Russia's not willing to do that. Again, the fact that diplomatically this is such a big deal, and yet on the facts on the ground, given the terrible bloodshed, given the amazing courage of the Syrian people to come out and fight this regime, it doesn't seem to be absolutely substantive at all.
Dave Clark, when we debated this issue earlier in the week, the issue of sanctions was a delicate one because there's the specter of Iraq, where sanctions seem to hurt ordinary citizens more than they ever did the regime of Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, and I've started to see tweets coming out on Twitter today from Syrians complaining that they're running out of diesel oil to heat their own homes in winter. And if there were crippling economic sanctions on Syria, then the people there would suffer a bit. But as Nadia said, they're suffering already under a terrible regime, and they're being locked up in their thousands, they're being killed in their hundreds. And so far, they have been extremely courageous. And if they can face down tanks, they can face down a cold winter. But back to the Russian proposal, not only is it light on substance, it also says in their motion that they're putting equal pressure on what they call the armed opposition and the regime. It's a change in tone in New York, but the substance of what they're proposing is exactly what they proposed all along. They're making a moral equivalence between the people protesting against Assad's regime and Assad's regime itself.
Thierry Arnaud, the French have been sort of, it seems like they've been front and center this week on this issue. Why did you hear such strong language from the ambassador to the UN there?
I think it's a very unusual language for starters. I've covered a few UN meetings and stakeouts and things like that, and it's probably the first time I can see and hear a French ambassador being so emotional about an issue. I think it's really the combination of the atrocities being committed in Syria and the clear inability of the international community to do something about it. And the reaction to the Russian resolution project is very interesting because it's quite clear to me that France doesn't like at all what is in the UN resolution. It's unacceptable to them to put on an equal standing the opposition and the current Syrian government. Yet they are trying as hard as they can to make somewhat constructive noises about it because they feel that if they can nudge Russia to move a little bit further ahead, then they will have gained something. But I think there's a tremendous amount of frustration among French diplomats right now.
At least trying to get observers in. It's interesting because we debated how sanctions could help or hurt, and also how close the country was becoming to a full-blown civil war. Now, the Associated Press has put out video footage sent by a group of fighters who claim to belong to the Free Syrian Army. These are deserters who say they were engaged in these images in a nighttime firefight with Syrian government forces in the northwest province of Idlib, near the Turkish border. Naida Nakad, how close is it to a civil war at this point?
It is, I wouldn't talk now about civil war because let's see why the Russians have done this today. If there is no consequence with this resolution that they're presenting, isn't it that they are feeling, and this is one of the questions, aren't they feeling that something is happening there, that after this amazing interview that President Assad has given saying, it's not me, what people on the ground are saying today is that he has lost even part of the Alawite support, which is extremely important. This is what... Then we also heard that some of the mukhabarat, the secret services, have left. We don't have any confirmation about this, but all these either rumors or information that is coming out can make us think that today the regime of Bashar al-Assad is weaker than it was before. Now, can't we ask...
Hence the spike in violence.
Hence the spike in violence, but also maybe the reaction of the Russians. Aren't the Russians today saying, let's try and modify a little bit our position concerning Syria, just in case this man will not stand and will not be able to stand any longer. So a civil war, yes, if it lasts longer, and then we can ask ourselves, what is the responsibility of the Syrian government in this? Because for about 7 months, it was only one side hitting on the people. And then, now today, things have changed, but it has changed lately, not from the beginning of the revolt.
Okay. This Friday, by the way, the last handover of a U.S. military base to Iraqis at what was Camp Adder is now Imam Ali Base. This on the outskirts of the southern city of Nasiriyah. Overall, pretty low-key, the handover business, both in Iraq and in the U.S., where the president did address troops at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Two reasons for this sober goodbye, you might say. One, it's an occupation that's cost the lives of nearly 4,500 Americans and more than 100,000 Iraqis. And it also comes 8 years after another president's speech to servicemen. And there's a George W. Bush in San Diego Bay in front of that mission accomplished the mission accomplished sign, Marcus Mabry, which came back to haunt him a little.
It did. That was, you know, it's kind of amazing, I think, especially from a global perspective, even more so from the U.S. perspective, that George W. Bush was reelected after that mission accomplished banner. It was, you know, the amazing thing to me about this, having not lived through Vietnam, but the amazing thing about this for me is that how the American people approach this day, and the reason it's not widely extolled, and there's kind of relative calm, especially given the toll in blood and treasure of American and Iraqi that it has waged this war. What strikes me is that, you know, no one can talk about a victory. A lot of people, you could talk if you're not looking at the most narrow definition of success, which is the toppling of Saddam Hussein, which the Bush administration was after when they went into Iraq. If you look at any other definition with regards to how this war is ended, it's hard to call it a success. And the word that is, you know, just beyond the frame always is defeat and loss. And no one's echoed that in the U.S., but I think it's really hard, especially in Washington right now, not to think of it that way. It's going to be interesting to see for the Republicans and for Obama how it plays out in the next year as they face an election.
Dave Clark, is it a win, a loss? What is it if you're an American?
If you're an American, I think it's a win if you're an Iranian. If you're an American, it's probably best not to concentrate on it too hard and move on. You've got your own problems at home, and you've still got a lot of fighting left to do in Afghanistan. I was reading a story, an article by John Bolton, of all people, this week, one of the most diehard neocons of the Bush era, saying that they shouldn't have created the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority, that they should have done things differently. And I think even people who supported the war accept now that things should have been done differently right back in the day, right back in 2003, 2004. And then in 2006, 2007, we have the surge, which some people managed to kind of turn into a narrative of victory for a few months. The idea was it saved them from ultimate defeat, and so it was it kind of pulled a draw out of the hat. But I worry that things may only just be beginning in Iraq now that the Americans are leaving. It's interesting to note that Camp Adder is now called Imam Ali. Imam Ali was a Shiite martyr killed by Sunnis, and these things are still very much in the minds of Iraqis.
All right, and on the one hand, as you say, there's been $1 trillion spent, which is huge. And on the other hand, the question is Iraq better off than it was under Saddam Hussein? Your newspaper runs a feature piece, Marcus Mabry, on the threat of fresh sectarian violence in Iraq. Interestingly enough, the article reports that many Shiites inside Iraq are wary of their Iranian neighbors. And Naida, you were telling us before we went on air that France 24's team that's in Iraq today is feeling this sort of diffuse sense of sort of danger right now.
Yeah, they told me about two things. One, about a real hatred, which is, of course, has existed, but apparently it's even stronger now. And the fact that some governorates are starting not to want to recognize anymore the authority of Baghdad. So apparently this is what they are feeling today. And this is what is going to be, we'll have to really watch to see how far the Americans were holding this country together. And the fact that they are leaving, will that be like the time when all the fears that we used to have about the partition of this country will come true or not? I think it's very hard times now, and the few even weeks to come are going to be extremely delicate in Iraq.
A few weeks to come.
Yes, I think it could. I think things could unravel very quickly. I think the whole region is in tension right now. I think it's in Tehran's interest for everyone to be worried about everywhere else, because obviously Iran is under a lot of pressure diplomatically and potentially militarily. A lot of explosions in arms production centers in Iran recently. A lot of assassinated officials. They brought down an American drone. Something is building in Iran, and they are extremely powerful when it comes to destabilizing the region. And they have proxy forces in Lebanon and in Gaza. They they're the last regime in the world perhaps to be supporting Damascus, and they have proxy militias inside Iraq.
All right, and when we come back with the world this week, we're going to look at the perspectives for the next few weeks, not in Iraq, but here in Europe, as the economy continues to show signs of buckling at the knees. And in the midst of it all, a brewing cross-channel row between France and Britain. Stay with us.